Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I have a really wonderful guest here today. I have Meg Geisewite. Meg is an ordinary mom who found herself trapped in the mummy wine culture. She began her sober curious journey in November of 2019, where her love of science led her to discover the real truth about alcohol and its seductive lies. As a best-selling author and speaker, Meg is changing the narrative on the mummy wine culture, the hustle culture, and our pro-drinking culture. In Meg's debut book, Intoxicating Lies, One Woman's Journey to Freedom from Gray Area Drinking, Meg flips the script on the 5 most intoxicating lies we tell ourselves about alcohol. Meg resides in Delaware with her husband and 2 teenage children. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. As I always do, I read your book cover to cover. I don't like to have guests on the podcast and not have read the book. So I can let everybody listening know it's a really, really great read. You did a fabulous job on it. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, especially coming from you.
Oh, well, it's really, really good. And I like the way it's organized. And, there were lots of parts in it that really resonated with me and my own story around alcohol, and then obviously some differences. And so we got all kinds of things to talk about today, but I would love it if you would start by just sharing as much of your story as you're comfortable with in terms of, how alcohol became problematic for you and when and how you decided to make a change with it.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading the book. And the book really does start with the lies that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then the 5 most intoxicating lies about alcohol. And the book starts out with my drinking story, which really, the earliest impressions of alcohol started for me in the 5th grade, where my mom would dress me up in my best Jessica McClintock dress and have me serve hors d'oeuvres to her cocktail party guests. And I learned people pleasing at a very young age and talking to adults. But what is important about this memory is that when we talk about the mommy wine culture, kids are watching, right? And so my mom was staying at home by herself all week with 3 kids as my dad traveled for work. So it was a way for her to unwind. I saw it as a way for him to let off steam, and no fault of their own, right? It's an old conditioned belief that this is how we connect, have fun. And that's exactly what I saw. Then at the same time, during that impressionable time in my life, I was ostracized by the popular girls in my class. And I didn't really feel like I fit in. And I talk about it in the book. My mom had taken us to a prominent psychiatrist in town to have our IQs tested. And I won't go into great detail, but in so many words, this woman told me that I wouldn't amount to much. And it was a good thing that I could draw, because that was really the only thing I had going for me. So I had this story at a very young age swirling in my head that I didn't fit in and that I really wouldn't amount to much. And so fitting in and being socially accepted was of utmost importance to me. And then my mom moved me out of that school. And when I got into a new school in 8th grade, I had the popular girls over for a slumber party. And we raided my mom and dad's liquor cabinet because they asked if we could do some shots. And of course, I wanted to fit in. So we did shots of peach schnapps, which looking back is just so disgusting. And I had my very first hangover, really just in an attempt to fit in. And high school, it just stayed that way. Drinking was like a social lubricant, a social way to fit in. Just whenever I could kind of sneak it in, I wasn't really allowed to go to parties or anything like that. And the same really stayed true in college. However, freshman year, got into an incident where I was drinking the cheap keg beer at a party on campus and started talking to a young man in the basement of this party where the music was really loud. And he said, I can't hear you. Can we go outside? And he took me behind a bush and I was sexually assaulted. And now I was feeling like I had no control over my body and that I wasn't good enough. So I really started looking outside of myself for worth. And I got myself into a second incident after college. This one was a date rape. And so again, heavy drinking was involved. And my sense of worthiness was probably at an all-time low. And I didn't realize at the time that I was having a trauma response, and I really went into an over-functioning, needing to control everything in my life because I felt so out of control, especially with what happened to me in my body. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And I had a lot of student loans. And so I got into modeling where my appearance, I was getting praised for my appearance. And I literally fell into being the poster child for big alcohol, where I became the Budweiser girl, the Guinness girl, and even the Jägermeister girl, handing out shots and drinks and koozies and all the promotional materials at bars, but really like getting a sense of approval for my body, my appearance. And I got into sales after college and really fell into that hustle culture. And it was one of those cultures where it was work hard, play hard. And that involved a lot of alcohol. And it was really almost frowned upon if you didn't go to the bar at the meetings. And after, there was always social happy hours and those things. And I fell into this sense of now looking at my worth and coming from a place of I am what I produce. I'm as good as my last rankings. And so that hustle culture of just grind, do more to earn my worth was really at a all-time high for me at that point in my life. And I then got into the beauty culture by falling into medical sales within the beauty industry. And so now it was not only like do it all at a grinding rate, but look perfect while you're doing it, and selling women on this notion as well. And this is where I met my husband, and we got married, and I would really say that alcohol was at the center of our relationship. We loved to entertain. It was very much part of our connection. And I do talk about that in the book of, going through this transition with him, which we can get into later. But we ended up having 2 kids. And I really fell into that mommy wine culture where I gulped down the lie that this was the solution to my parenting challenges, when the witching hours of kids having tantrums and trying to get them to go to bed at night. I found that my reward was wine. And I really feel like the first lie, and the lie I hear the most from women in my book, is I deserve a drink, which goes hand in hand with the mommy wine culture. And we are fed this lie that it is a way of self-care, that it is the permission slip, it is the social norm and permission slip to rest. We're all exhausted, and we're not modeled how to rest or told to rest. And so this having wine turns into a self-care reward. I've earned it permission slip that is socially acceptable for moms. And it's put, at every kid's function, because, you and I, when we grow up, we were running outside till the lights came on. And that's just not how parenting is happening these days. It's much more involved and less alone time and time for us to even figure out what our needs are. And so at that point, I was so disconnected from myself. I couldn't even tell you what my needs were. I was what my therapist at the time called me dutiful yet dead. I was taking care of everyone's needs at work, coming home, taking care of the house, the kids, and then falling into the couch with a glass of wine as my self-care. And I had no idea that it was compounding and making my parenting harder at the time. And so what ended up happening was my drinking at that time was still what I would call recreational, social kind of usage. But then I had 3 back-to-back 2-week apart major life incidents that happened that I talk about in the book and just briefly touch upon. But the importance of this is that, we can have a divorce, a loss. We lost our best friend, a job loss. There's a lot of things and major life incidents that can happen. And what happened was I was so overwhelmed with all of the anxiety. And really, we don't have, again, an earth school to tell us how to deal with a dysregulated nervous system. So I went to what society has told me to do, which is, gosh, life is tough, have a drink. And so my drinking shifted at that point from what I would say a recreational social usage to a medicinal nightly wine habit. And I started feeling very trapped in this detox to retox, maddening Groundhog's Day of waking up with a slight hangover. Sometimes it was one glass of wine, sometimes it was the entire bottle. It just kind of depended on how hard the day was and what I felt like I deserved. And then starting my day at a deficit with shame and why can't I get this under control and what's wrong with me? Putting myself through a strenuous workout to believe that I was in control. This was the illusion that helped me believe. Like I would bike 20 miles and be like, I don't have a problem. See, I just biked 20 miles,
Right.
And it was these messages that I kept telling myself, like, you drink like everyone else. And probably the most dangerous thing that happened to me was I finally, because I knew I was in a toxic relationship with alcohol, got the courage to tell my therapist, I think I have a drinking problem. And here's this maddening Groundhog's Day that I feel like I'm living in. And she said, no, I think you're just thinking about it too much. And so, we get these permission slips from our healthcare providers, our therapists, our doctors. We go to workouts and it's yoga and champagne. I would go to spin classes, sweat out the toxins. It's okay if you're hungover. And it really kept me trapped. I mean, her ill advice kept my gray area of drinking going for 2 more years. I blamed myself wholeheartedly. I thought, I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. Everybody else has got this in control. And really, when I would talk to friends about it, they're like, your drinking looks just like mine. And so I would do that comparison lie where we compare our drinking to other people and think that this was so-called normal. And it was a confusing place. I felt alone. I struggled silently for years until finally that small voice, which I call in the book, my inner knowing, was pleading with me to do something about my toxic relationship with alcohol, because I had finally come to a place where this nightly wine habit was starting to take control of my life. And here's, we can argue if we have a rock bottom or not, right? I don't think it really matters. But if you were to say I had one, it was when I no longer wanted my kids to do sports in the evening so I could come home to my rewarding glass of wine. I realized in that moment, it scared me. I was like, I'm no longer in control of this. This is in control of me. I started to, feel like when I got to parties, where's the bar? And I needed it and I had to have it. And I've heard you speak, it was like, if I had a good day, I needed it. If I had a bad day, I needed it. I could find an excuse to drink for any reason. And it was just slowly but surely becoming and slowly taking control in my life in a way that started to scare me. So again, I didn't want to break up with alcohol, but I figured I was the problem. I just needed to get a few tools under my tool belt. And so I found Jen Couch's Sober Sis on the internet, and I clicked on her videos and watched her talk about this detox to retox, which she really coined, loop. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. There's somebody else out there that thinks like I do. Now, this was November of 2019. So there wasn't a ton on gray area drinking at that point. There was a few of us that were, were starting to come out and talk about it. But I just saw myself in her videos. So I just thought, I will join this group, because in the past, when I had tried quitting, it was never more than 2 weeks. It was sheer willpower. It was like white knuckling it on day 14. I was like, oh my gosh. And, it was cleanses and diets and more things to help me believe I was in control, because I'm a controller, I'm a planner type A. And so those types of things kept me in the illusion and lie that I was in control. So when I got into her program, I thought, probably be me and 3 other women. That's how alone I felt in this struggle. And there were hundreds of women. And I thought, why are there so many women in here? And I have always loved to write. I have always journaled my whole life, and even wrote for the school newspaper in college, and really had, like you've said in your journey, lost my sense of creativity and lost my sense of who I was. And just because now I had more time, I started journaling what was happening, because I was so curious as to why there were so many women in this group. And Jen had us in her daily lessons start reading Annie Grace's This Naked Mind, as well as through her daily lessons, I started asking myself questions like, why am I using a depressant to celebrate? And, when I read This Naked Mind, it was like the veil started coming down and learning the truths about alcohol. And because I'm in pharmaceutical sales, I love to sell on science. I was like obsessed with the science that Annie wrote about. And I thought, why isn't anybody telling us that this is linked to 7-8 types of cancers? Why aren't we told this is a highly addictive drug? And I started just becoming more and more curious. At that time, Jen only had her 21-day reset. So I took Annie Grace's This Naked Mind, the alcohol experiment, and did that for another 30 days because I had never felt better. And I really was starting to become even more curious, and my eczema was starting to clear up. I was starting to sleep better. And I thought, what is this? What is happening? And then Jen came out with a 90-day alcohol-free lifestyle program. And I really felt like at that time, I'm going to give myself 100 days just to see what I feel like at that point. And my husband was like, is this a forever thing? Are you doing this forever? And I was like, I really don't know. I'm just taking this as it comes. But I just stayed curious through the whole process. And every day I was journaling my experiences, what I was waking up to. It was like the fog was lifting, and I was becoming aware of all these intoxicating lies that I had believed about myself, about alcohol. And so it was really around that 100 days that things really started to shift in my brain. And I had realized that I had fallen into the intoxicating lies of instant gratification, right? We have all of these things in our society that says, like, get thin in 30 days and, change your relationship with alcohol. And maybe it's a good thing we have these things, because I wouldn't have done it otherwise. But it's really another illusion to thinking that dry January is enough. And good, look, I'm not dissuading anybody from doing it, because I think it allows the door to be open to looking at our relationship and exploring it. But I really want to say that it was around that 100 days that things really started to shift for me. And I wasn't just fixed in 21 days. And I talk about that in the book. And so that's really where, and then I just kept on going, kept journaling. And the girls in my group were like, you need to write a book. I would read to them my journal entries. And slowly but surely, it did turn into a book.
Yeah, that is so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was so eloquent. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how many similarities there are in your story to my story, including the last little bit you talked about, the 100 days marker. And I do want to spend a second on that, because I think that's a really important point. I am also a fan of just getting anybody into a period of time alcohol free so that they can experience what that's like. But I think too often with these extreme fixes, they're really just rooted in deprivation. And, there's not a lot of room for curiosity and for the possibility that you might actually not want to drink after the period is over. And so whenever I did any of those cleanses or dry Januaries, I had the same experience as you, which is like, I just could not wait to drink again. And I never made it for the whole time. So my experience was really similar, though. When you said that about the 100 days, I thought, yeah, that's probably around the time for me too, that it started to really shift. That would have been the first time where I would have said, maybe not out loud yet, but to myself, like, maybe I don't want to drink again,
up until that point, I think I would have just been unsure and said something like, not yet, like, no, I'm not going to try to moderate yet. But there's something to be said for that longer period of time, because in that, what happens is like, you can't do that by willpower alone. That kind of length of time only happens when you start to open up your brain to the science, and you get curious, and you start to shift things in terms of that cognitive dissonance that's there. And you start, testing some of those beliefs that you have, as you say, those intoxicating lies. So before we keep going, what are the 5 lies?
So the first one is, I deserve a drink.
Right.
And each chapter opens up with the lie and ends with the truth, just so you know. And I know you read it, but for your readers or listeners. And the second one is, do I have a drinking problem? Or I don't think I have a drinking problem.
Yeah.
The third one is, I can control my drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth one, which was my greatest fear, is, I will be boring if I'm sober. The fifth one is, the mommy wine culture. Behind every great mom is a bottle of wine.
Mm.
And I do have another chapter that you and I can talk about as well, which is really not a lie, but more about progress over perfection, because there are a lot of side steps in this journey.
Yeah.
And so there is a chapter about that as well, because I think a lot of women can resonate, and men too, where this takes practice. It's like Holly Whitaker says in her book, Quit Like a Woman. You don't just get up and run the New York Marathon. It takes training and practice. And so I think there's so much shame around this space, just in general. And we have to lose that shame, because it is not our fault. It is our responsibility. I know we've talked about, we talk about that in this space, but it's really that we are not warned anywhere about how addictive this substance is. And we're modeled that, well, why can't you get it under control? I mean, I really have a hard time when people say to me, did you have a problem? And it's like, no, I'm not the problem. It's the problem. Mm-hmm. And so it's my responsibility to explore it, get curious, and do something about it. But I'm not the problem. Mm-hmm. And when we can see that, we can lose that shame. And I think just also the side steps in our journeys really propel us forward if we don't give up and we learn from that. And we have to model that to our children as well. Like, I don't want my children to think I'm perfect. And I talk about that in that chapter as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important. And I really enjoyed that chapter in particular, because that is something that, it's missing from the conversation a lot of the time. And some of the approaches to drinking less or not quitting drinking don't have a lot of room for that. And I don't know that serves most women. So I love that. And for the people listening to this podcast right now, I know you're out there. I see you, who are thinking to themselves, that's me. I've been at this for way too long. You're probably exactly where you're supposed to be. Just keep going. Can we just go to one specific point for a second? You said something in this book, and I thought, ooh, this is so compelling coming from someone who's in pharmaceutical sales. You probably know a lot about FDA approvals. And there's a line in the book, and I've read this before, but in many different places, but I just had forgotten it. And I don't know if I've ever said it on the podcast. So I want you to tell people what would happen if we tried to get alcohol approved right now as a drug.
Never be FDA approved.
Yeah. Why not?
Because it's a toxin, and it is linked to all these types of cancers, and there's no way that it would be approved. No amount of alcohol is safe.
Yeah.
I mean, that statement in and of itself, no matter where you are on the spectrum of the alcohol use disorder, that is profound. And so there's no way, if it was discovered today, that the FDA would approve it. And I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah. And it's a really important thing. I mean, things are shifting, and I'm not, this is not an anti-drinking podcast. I have lots of listeners who drink, who don't have a problematic relationship with alcohol, but I am all about informed consent. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are drinking without that, because the information just isn't out there. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Canadian guidelines just shifted in January. So we have a really different situation here, where we are starting to really recognize that. And it's starting to become a bit more mainstream that we're talking about, the inherent risks of drinking, and that, low risk drinking in Canada is now defined as 3 drinks or less a week. So, and that's not no risk drinking, that's lower risk drinking. So right. Yeah, I just thought when I read that, I thought, ooh, you have so much street cred on that particular statement. I'm going to ask you about that.
Well, I just love how Canada is leading the way. And I listened to your podcast with Ann Dowsett Johnston, and I just thought it was a great podcast. And it's one where I think the United States needs to look towards you all as the leaders and taking charge on this, because if your entire country and your councils are looking at the safety of alcohol, why are we not? And there's, I say this in the book too, when there's great suffering, there's usually great profit, and so unfortunately there's so much, there's so many hands in this cookie jar.
100%. 100%. So let's just go back quickly. We obviously don't have time to talk about all of these lies on the podcast episode. And I'm going to encourage people who are curious about this to buy your book and read about it, because you do such a great job of talking about all of them. But I definitely want to just talk about the truth about the I deserve a drink, because this is the one that really, the way you said it, I thought that is such a simple way to say the thing that I've been honestly trying to say for a long time, and that I've written about myself, this idea of what we really need, what women really need is to rest.
Yes.
I underlined that when I got to the end of that chapter. I was like, yeah, that's what this is all about. It's about the fact, and I talk a lot about like doing, and never spending any time, like just being, and how that really,
love that
went down. And obviously I'm a burnout coach, so this is my world. But I just loved the simple way you stated that at the end of the chapter. Like, the lie is I deserve a drink. The truth is I deserve a rest.
Yes.
And so then the question becomes, how do we get that? So, because that's a complicated thing for women. Like, what are your thoughts on how we get started when it comes to giving ourselves what we really deserve and need, which is a break or a rest?
Yeah. I think we're so busy. We have endless to-do lists, little like tickers that are going across our brains of invisible labor with the kids. And there's just you're constantly needed and things to do. And so, what a time suck where we actually sat down and drank for, I'm sure it was more than 20 minutes, probably hours, convincing ourselves that this was self-care. When in that 20 minutes, yes, you do get that sense of relief, but then you are chasing that 20-minute buzz for the rest of the night. So what an absolute time suck. And as women, we always say, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. So if we could take that 20 minutes, and this is what I do, is spend 5 minutes of it just meditating or sitting with our thoughts and slowing down. And I know you've talked about this. This is a hard one for our society, because we are told to not be with our thoughts, not feel our feelings, and to not slow down. So this is going to go against everything you've been modeled, everything you've been shown. However, if you sit on a little pillow in front of a window with a candle, and you can focus on the candle. And I talk about some of the self-care methods within the book. Especially as women, we are given a lot of confusing messages that we're too much, we're not enough, we're too sensitive, we're too aggressive. It's a very confusing space, and it makes us look outside of ourselves. So what I encourage you to do is get an intention journal, sit on that pillow, do an I am. And I say, don't do the roles of I am, like I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, I'm a sister. No, I am creative. I am enough. I am love, or I am loving. I am generous. And I really, really sit and try to reconnect with that inner knowing and who you are. And then sit with that and just take deep breaths and repeat those I ams to yourself, like as a mantra, and read them over and over again. And you will feel so more connected to yourself. I know so many times challenges have come up, and I'll say, I need to go to my room for 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll sit there and with my journal, and the answers pop up. We are our greatest healers. The answers are within us, but we don't slow down enough to hear the answers.
Yeah.
Talk about creativity. I'll tell you what, when I slowed down, the creativity just started pouring out of me. And so we want to be more creative in whatever capacity that holds true for you, but we don't slow down enough to feel it and listen to it and honor it. And so we're told to dismiss and brush off our feelings. And I talk about this in the book too. We need to honor them and acknowledge them. And choosing to be alcohol free really forces you to sit with your uncomfortable feelings, which is probably the greatest gift we're given in the journey. And so we know we can do this. You can do it. And whether it's 5 minutes or 20 minutes, I promise you, you will come back to a place where you are a better wife, a better mom, and it's not going to add to your anxiety, your depression, and compound your parenting. It's actually going to regulate your nervous system and bring you back to a place of calm and patience. I mean, when my kids told me, Mom, you have so much more patience now, I was like, oh my God, is there anything better than that? Like, that's what we want for our children. And I don't want my children to see me at every hard turn. I have a chapter about a trip where we were quarantined in Aruba, and I was stuck in this country by myself with my daughter, and we were not, because she got COVID while we were there. And it was high stress, high anxiety. All of the monsters, I call them, were having a seat at my table of anxiety and fear and, all the things. And I let them come to the table and just, hi, see you there. It's okay, you're here, and I get why you're here. And let my daughter see that it was kind of a messy, but I'm not going to pad myself at every hard turn with alcohol or any other, we have so many distractions. It could be shopping, food, work. Sometimes when we remove alcohol, we can substitute it with another distraction, like scrolling on our phones. It's another way of checking out and numbing out. And so it's really returning to this place of awareness within, and this step of clarity that brings confidence and contentment of truly who you are.
Yeah, I love that. I think so many things in that. I love the idea. It's an exercise I do with most of my clients at some point, this idea of like listing all of the things that make you you, but that have nothing to do with what you do. Yes. Because it's our instinct to just write down all the things we do. I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm a, whatever, sister, I'm a friend. And instead just the things that you are inherently. And it's a hard exercise for a lot of women. And you're right. The sitting down is the toughest part, like learning how to do that. But that was a huge piece of my journey as well. I started meditating before I quit drinking, actually. And normally it was not for more than 15 minutes. Sometimes it was 5 minutes. Sometimes it was 15 minutes. Occasionally it was a little longer than that, but most of the time it was, 5 to 10 minutes that I would spend. And that was a big deal for me to sit still like that. And, that I love the idea of the candle. That's that in that situation. If you guys have listened to me talk about meditation, that would be the anchor that I talk about, the thing that you focus on and come back to when you find your thoughts, you find yourself drifting away from it. And I think that's such a great, simple way to do that for women. And it sounds really lovely too. So I like that. And then when you were talking about your kids and the patience piece, that's something I hear a lot as well from the women that I work with. Was just talking to a client this morning who she's 7 days alcohol free and feeling amazing. But also one of the most powerful things she's noticed is the different way that she's parenting now as a result of not drinking. And it's a simple act of being able to sit with her children and read them a story at night and not feel pulled to have a drink, which, I don't know what that feels like because I didn't quit until my kids were 13, but I do remember that. I remember that pull and I wish, I have regret about that. So yeah, I think all of that's amazing. And the modeling of your kids of, being able to handle tough stuff without alcohol and not always having it all together is also really important. I'm very grateful for that, my ability to go through the last year of my dad's life alcohol free, and then through his death alcohol free, so that my kids could see. And it was messy a lot during that year, as you can imagine. So I love all of that.
And I think the beauty is in the mess.
Totally.
It's
100%.
We don't want to be around people who are perfect all the time. We love when people are vulnerable and real and authentic and not perfect. And so I think, our kids need to see that too, and learning how to trust their inner knowing. I'm having a lot of discussion with my daughter, like, what's your gut telling you? Trust yourself. What is your body telling you? Is it a hell yes or a hell no? Because I feel like our intuition as women is always guiding us back to the truth, but we just don't slow down enough to listen to it. And the monkey mind, I just want to say this because I forgot to mention it, is a very real thing and is very normal. Like, again, I hear women say, I don't know how to meditate and I don't know how to journal. And I'm like, there's no rules. And everything you feel, when your thoughts are going from branch to branch like a monkey, is normal. Like, it's okay. Let it come in and then let it go. And every day it will get a little bit better and a little bit easier, just like the alcohol-free journey. I don't care if you cuss in your journal or draw pictures in your journal, if it's 1 word or 10 pages, it doesn't matter. It's your truth. And it's a place for you to not have any judgment, to not have, who being told who you are, I hate the word should, like who you should be, when we were talking about shoulds and shame in the book, but I talk about that too. I think it's a big one where we are just told over and over again, you should do this, you should be like that, you should, XYZ. And then when we don't do that, we feel like a failure and we beat ourselves up and we get stuck in this shame cycle.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think all of those points are great. And on the journaling thing, I love the idea of just drawing or doing whatever, 1 word. I always say to my clients who struggle with journaling, I personally struggle with journaling. It's which is interesting because I love to write, but journaling is just not my thing and it never has been. And for a lot of the people that I work with, lists are more accessible than paragraphs. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I hate journaling, I'm never going to do that, I hear you, that was me. But just writing lists of, like, today I had my clients writing, list of all of the firsts that happened this week without alcohol for her. And, all of, a list of the little things that she noticed this week that were better without alcohol. There's so many different ways to do this. I love what Meg's saying. There's no right or wrong with meditation or journaling or any of it. The important thing is just to start it. And to recognize that that's part of getting to a place where it feels like you're actually taking something that you need and you're getting that rest and you're getting that break. Can we go to the I don't have a problem for just a second? Because obviously we talk a lot about gray area drinking on this podcast, but what we haven't really done is go through the test for how you're a gray area drinker. I always say, like, I'm kind of a fan of, like, no test, right? It's just like, are you happy? Do you feel great about your relationship with alcohol? If not, then let's investigate further. But I did love the part in this chapter where you went through and you kind of listed from the RIA Health website, from Jolene Park's website, from Jen Couch's website, some of the questions that you can ask yourself if you're currently wondering, do I fall into this gray area of drinking? Is this a problem for me?
Well, Jolene Park's TED Talk really resonated with me, and I love her definition of what gray area drinking is. I know it's been in the medical literature for well over a decade, so it's not something that she came up with, but that is in the medical literature. But I think it's really, and that's why I wrote the book, by the way, because I couldn't find any books on gray area drinking, and I really wanted to explore what that was. I'm not a doctor here to diagnose, but I really do want people to get curious. And like you said, I think it's more important of asking yourself a couple questions, like whether the doctor thinks you are or are not, or the therapist or the friend or the family member, that doesn't matter. What matters is, are you free? Is it serving you? What do you believe it's providing for you? And so I'll just touch on Jolene's definition really quickly, and then I can go into some of the questions. But Jolene's definition of gray area drinking is the space between end stage drinking, which would need a medical detox, where somebody is really physically and psychologically dependent upon alcohol. That's that side of the spectrum. On the other end is what we would call a take it or leave it drinker, like an aunt who may have a glass of champagne at a wedding and maybe one other glass of wine at her birthday, and she doesn't even finish it. Right. So it's really somebody who could sincerely take it or leave it. And then you have this spectrum in between those two. And it's vast, it's large, it's self-identified. And really what I love that Jolene says, and I have it in the book here, is that, where is it here? I'm just looking for it. It doesn't take a huge amount of alcohol to become a gray area drinker, because there is no safe or recommended healthy intake of alcohol. Right. So, but it really is like what I described in my story, years of an internal struggle where you're questioning and you're feeling trapped in this vicious detox to retox cycle. It's very common among women in particular. We saw during the pandemic, I talk about this in the book as well, that heavy drinking went up 41% in women because we are, again, carrying the house, sometimes work online, and then we were trying to homeschool the kids online, and it was just too much. And we were told, hey, have a quarantini, that will solve all your problems. And day drinking started to become normalized. But some of the questions to, ask yourself is, how do you feel about your drinking? And again, going back to some of those questions, are you using it medicinally? Like, are you using it to solve problems? Is it a self-reward? What are your fears about it? Like mine, where I was afraid I would be boring. Like, do you believe it's almost like a facade, like it is part of your identity? And I think the big trick for gray area drinkers is there's usually no external consequences. So there's usually not a rock bottom. We are the people who are highly functioning at work, winning awards, doing great at home. Kids are thriving, so it looks like to the outside world, we have all of our stuff together. Right. But internally, we are struggling with that pull to get away from the bedtime stories, to go downstairs for the drink, the pull at the party, to go to the bar before you can even speak to anybody. Mm-hmm. It's that pull and tug and that maddening Groundhog's Day. If you feel like you're trapped in that, I highly suggest you start to question and get curious about your relationship. And work with, the other thing I say in my book is that we not only need rest, and ask yourself, what is it that I really need right now? Do I need food? Do I need rest? And you're right, it usually is rest. But the other thing we need is community and connection and support. This is where a coach like you is critical in this journey, because up until then, we're usually white knuckling it. And as gray area drinkers, we're taking lots of breaks, thinking we're in control. But again, it's another illusion. We slowly fall back into that infamous Pisher plant of, the sweet nectar of deceit, and thinking that we are in control when we're not. So I really can't emphasize the importance enough about community and connection and support, as well as rest. That's what.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because I wanted to talk a bit about that too. That's something I try to raise every time I talk about alcohol. I try to raise the community connection point, because it wasn't there for me. When I stopped drinking, it was 2018, very beginning of 2018. There was almost nothing online in terms of community. There was This Naked Mind. It just sort of started with a Facebook group, and I was in that. But I was really uncomfortable in there. I didn't want to share. I was a creeper, I read all the comments, but I didn't know anybody who didn't drink, who didn't self-identify as an alcoholic and was in AA. So I didn't know anyone who identified as a gray area drinker. I didn't really even know what that was. And it's one of the best things about the pandemic. I think the silver lining in it all, which, I've talked about before, is the community that's grown online, in particular for women. And there's lots of stuff that still needs to change on this platform, but there has been a lot of growth on it during the course of the pandemic, as we became more comfortable with, doing things online. So I think that's fabulous. And I love the role that you describe this in such a lovely way in your book, the smaller sober cis group, that the group of you that stayed together, that supported each other through and still, I think, probably support each other. And I've seen that with many of my clients who develop that community. And it's something that I try to create through the podcast, frankly, and also through social media, and sometimes actually run group programs for women as well, because I just know the importance of that. And I'm always recommending, if someone's working with me one-on-one, that at the end of our time together, there's some connection and community in place for them, so that they're not off doing it on their own. So I appreciate you raising that. That's really, really important. And, back to the gray area drinking for 1 second, I just have the list in front of me, and a couple of the things, like, as I read these lists again, that I thought, I loved what you said, no rock bottom. That's really common in gray area drinkers, but the silent conversations with yourself about your own drinking,
It's just like ding, 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 ding. Like that was my life for years. I was constantly talking to myself about my own drinking. Are you drinking too much? Will you drink tonight? Is it too soon to drink again? You drank last night or you drank 2 nights ago. Will you have another glass? Should you just have one? How many glasses are the other people having? So that constant internal conversations, I think it's just such a red flag for, this is not good. Right.
No, I mean, it's that internal struggle that's maddening. I mean, it's like maddening. You're just like, oh my God, I'm so sick of thinking about this.
Yeah. And then the other one that I think is important, which you kind of mentioned, is the idea that you can stop drinking. And this is again, it's like a real, I think one of these lies we tell ourselves, like, I have this under control because I can take a break from it. And most gray area drinkers can take a break, and I could definitely take a break. So it felt to me like I had this thing under control and it wasn't such a big deal.
Right.
Can we go back to detox to retox? Because we've touched on this a couple times in the podcast, in other podcast episodes, but I'd love for you to talk a bit about it because you have a really great shame cycle that you actually have a diagram for in your book that I think is fantastic. Just talk about when you're talking about detox to retox, that's like a daily cycle, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you talk about the kind of the stages in that, like what that looks like?
Sure. So, it really starts off with that exhaustion, don't know what your needs are, feeling dutiful yet dead, and boy, I deserve a drink. And so many of us, I have to say, this is the most common lie in my book that I hear from people. This is the one. I deserve it. I earned it. This is my reward. So that's where we start. Yeah. And we know for many of us, it's usually not one. Yeah. It feels so good that we go for that second and third, but we don't realize is that we're just chasing that initial buzz that's never going to come back. So I'll have one more. I've really had a hard day. And then we go into this poor sleep. And we usually wake up at 3 a.m. because our bodies are trying to rid itself of the alcohol. And we wake up with anxiety and shame. And that's where that internal chatter starts to come in again. Why? I said tonight I wasn't going to do it. Why did I do it? What is wrong with me? It's a constant me, I'm the problem. And it's this questioning of, again, the shoulds. I shouldn't have drank so much. And so we wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do better today. I'm going to get this under control. I'm going to have a green juice for breakfast. I'm going to eat a kale salad for lunch. I'm going to go to the spin class this afternoon. And even after it, I'm going to go, work out even harder. And so it's this detox that's happening all day and this illusion and belief that we are in control. And because we are starting at a deficit and we are working off a slight hangover all day, and we have not filled our buckets up. May I say that? We have not done anything to take care of ourselves. That when that 5 p.m. rolls around and somebody else needs you for something else that day, and you've given your last drop of blood to them, you fall quickly. Your brain switches back to, I deserve a drink. Right. And because we, again, don't have an earth school where we are taught how to care for ourselves in a healthy manner. I mean, I think there's a lot of, and I know Jolene Park is talking about this a lot too, but there's just this whole new, regulating our nervous systems, and whether it be with breath work or meditation or going for a walk, just simple things that we can do where busy moms can pull over on the side of the road and just take a couple deep breaths and maybe listen to some calming music. I mean, there are things we can do no matter how busy we are, but we get into this vicious loop where we just are under the illusion that we're in control and that we can control it and that we won't do it again. And then slowly but surely, as the sun sets, our brain flips and we're right back to where we started.
Yeah. And that I deserve it thing is almost, it's more likely you're going to say that after doing all of those great, healthy activities all day long, right? You convince yourself, I just remember I deserve this. Not only do I deserve it because I just deserve it, but I deserve it because I had the green juice and I had the kale and I went to the spin class and I did all the things today. And the lie in all of that, of course, is that you're not actually detoxing that day. Like that's not actually happening. And so, yeah, I think it's just an important piece of this to be talking about. Now, I have one more thing I really want to make sure we cover, Meg. I could talk to you for 2 hours, but I can't. But maybe I'll have you back next season.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah. So one of the things though that you talked about in the book that I really wanted to cover today was the just one sip story, I call it. So do you want to just kind of give the backstory for
Sure.
this and the lesson that you learned through that?
Yeah. So I was in a group, like you said, a smaller group of women, and I had become very close to one woman in particular. I really looked up to her. And we were about 15 months of being alcohol free. Now, I'd like to just tell you, I was still in a little bit of a deprivation mindset with alcohol. Way back in my subconscious, I had this lurking belief that I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on this podcast, but
You can go ahead.
Okay, if the shit hit the fan, I could still have a drink if everything went to hell in a handbasket. And I know I should have known better. However, it was still lurking back there. And during COVID, she had said to me, Meg, you've done a lot of the inner work. You've been working with your life coach. I really think that you can just take some sips. I think, basically that we were kind of cured of this gray area drinking. And I was like, really? You really think that is doable? And she's like, yeah, I've just had like a couple sips here and there, and I've been fine. And so again, I started looking outside of myself for that validation, for that truth. Mm-hmm. And the shit did hit the fan. I was fighting with my husband about politics. The presidential debate was happening. Mm-hmm. My husband is immunocompromised. I was like the bad guy in the house with COVID, trying to keep everybody safe from everything. I was trying to sell online to my doctors who, that's nearly impossible. Right. I was losing cases. There was nothing I could do. I'm in rare disease now, so it's really hard to find patients. Mm-hmm. And I had found out that my daughter had been vaping. And that she had lied to me about it. So literally everything I was fighting for was pressing up against me to it, what I call in the book, an F it moment. And we're all going to have them in this journey. Mm-hmm. And I just hit the wall, and I listened to outside of myself. That I did not listen to my inner knowing, who was telling me the sips are not going to be doing you any justice, but still had that lurking belief. Went down in my basement, poured myself a big glass of red wine, took 3 huge sips. It burned going down. My stomach popped up and was like, are we really doing this? Like, what is happening? And I just didn't care. I was at a place where I didn't want to fight for my sobriety. I didn't want to fight for anything anymore. And my daughter came down the stairs with tears in her eyes. And she said, Mommy, is this my fault? And it was like my why got slapped across my face. Mm. And I thought, here I am using a substance that is highly addictive. I'm telling her to not do a highly addictive drug. That doesn't even make sense, right? What am I doing? Yeah. What am I modeling to her? That when life is, again, I've said it earlier, but when life is really hard, I'm just going to go, have that glass of wine because Mommy needs it. Yeah. And so I sat down with her and I poured the drink down the drain. And I said, you know what? We all make mistakes. Yeah. And we all have choices. And if we learn from those mistakes and we make better choices the next time, then it's not a failure. And you had a choice and you tried something and you learned from it. And I don't like lying, but but let's just talk about progress over perfection. Yeah. I'm not perfect. I came down here because I was struggling, and I thought this was a solution where I was going to wake up tomorrow. COVID was still going to be there. The presidential debate was still going to be going on. I was still going to have to sell online. It was not going to solve a single thing. And that moment woke me up to so much of what I still had this belief in my mind that it was a reward or a crutch, and that it was neither.
Yeah.
And so I was grateful for that moment of being able to say, this is no longer something I want to even have in my life. It's providing me with absolutely nothing. It's only taking versus giving. And what am I modeling?
Yeah. Such a great story for so many reasons, but the two things that I took away from it that I thought would be helpful for the listeners to hear is the first piece of everybody makes mistakes and it's part of learning. This is how you learn these things. If you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't have gotten to that place of conviction and clarity around this.
Right.
So it's always okay. I say this to my clients all the time, but nobody buys into it. It's okay to pour the wine down the drain, even if you've already had a glass.
Yes.
That's a huge success.
Yes.
So that moment of clarity of realizing this isn't actually the right decision for me, I actually made a mistake here, is actually something to celebrate.
Yes.
And I'm always so excited when clients tell me that they had a few sips and then dumped it down the sink. It hardly ever happens, because what immediately our brain does is say, oh, well, now you've screwed up. This, there's no point now. You're a mess. You failed, all the rest of it. So I love that. And the second piece of it, obviously the role modeling piece with your daughter. I mean, how powerful is that moment as a parent? And that clarity is something I talk about as well. Just, for a long time, I wasn't parenting with integrity around alcohol because I was drinking, but my kids were 13 when I stopped drinking. And I have had just the real gift really of parenting my kids through their teenage years as an alcohol-free parent. And it doesn't mean I did it perfectly. And my kids aren't perfect. They're just kids.
Right.
But I feel like going through that for me felt a lot more authentic and sort of in alignment with who I wanted to be and how I want to show up as a parent than it was feeling before that. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's such a great story. And honestly, Meg, I have like 20 more questions that I'd love to talk to you about, but we don't have time. And so I'm going to encourage people to get this book. Again, it's called Intoxicating Lies. And I will include in the show notes the details on the book. What do you want to share with the listeners in terms of how they can find out more about you in the book?
So you can get the book anywhere books are sold.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to intoxicatinglies.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. And I post some really great tips, tools, and latest podcasts I've been on. And you can follow me on Instagram, which I also have a Facebook page. They're tied together, but I pretty much live on Instagram, which is Intoxicating Lies Book, all
Great.
one word, Intoxicating Lies Book. But I really want to thank you. I could talk to you forever too, and it was just such a joy and honor to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm definitely keeping you on my list for come back as a repeater. It's so great when the conversation flows and I'm on the same kind of wavelength with people. And like I said, so much of this book resonated with me, and I know it will resonate with my listeners because you just speak to some of the simplest lies really that we tell ourselves that keep us stuck in something that's not serving us. Right. So thank you so much for your time today, Meg, and hopefully I'll see you again.
Thank you, Wendy. I would love to come back.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a certified Naked Mind coach, I help busy women like you find freedom from alcohol. If you're starting to question your relationship with alcohol, you'll want to listen to my free 3-part video series where I address the top 3 myths around why you think you need to drink. Sign up now at www.wendymccallum.com/myths. That's www.wendymccallum.com/myths.